Mountain bike brakes. Disc brakes versus V brakes. What is the actual major difference between the two? Disc brakes, or hydraulic disc brakes, have good stopping power. It's not necessarily more than the V brakes, but V brakes tend to be more on or off. You know, your braking force is far easier to control on your disc brakes versus your V brakes. You know, it's the modulation, they call that the modulation of the brake. If it's a good quality disc brake, will have good stopping power, more than enough to throw you over the handlebars, and the V brake will also be able to throw you over the handlebars, but the bite point when you're pressing the lever on the disc brake is going to be, you know, you're going to be able to tell where that bite point is far easier. Also, going down a steep hill, say you're doing 40 miles an hour down a hill in Bike Park Wales, like AC/DC or something like that, you need to slow down downhill. You're going to not have brake fade, because V brakes generally get a load of crud in them, mud, stuff like that. I'm in the UK, so mud, rain, salt, grit, all that kind of stuff just destroys brake blocks really quickly, and basically you would require a new set of brake blocks after every run if you wanted to keep the performance anywhere near the same. Of course, older bikes can still do some of this stuff. Well, okay, not modern downhill, that's just silly on V brakes. That's just I mean, you could do it, you'll be able to do it, but you're not going to get the same kind of time, because you're going to have to brake far earlier than you are with disc brakes. Disc brakes, you're just going to have more control, better modulation, and there's going to be less grabby than the V brakes are. Also, V brakes basically require the rim to be basically in good condition. It has to be flat. You know, the actual edge, the surface the brake block comes in contact with has to be flat. Over time, the V brake block wears the rim away, and older bikes with the V brakes would have a rim that would have something called a safety line on the rim. Once this line had worn away, you were supposed to replace the rim, because its structural integrity is massively compromised. It will say safety line, and replace rim once this line is no longer visible, on a little yellow sticker typically. I was speaking to someone earlier on YouTube, and they were saying that they think disc brakes are just basically a gimmick. But you know, for downhill racing and stuff like that, when you're going 50-60 miles an hour down a steep hill and need to slow down for a tight corner or something like that, that is absolutely not the case. When I did you know, I messed around with a lot of stuff: push bikes, electric scooters, electric bikes, off-road vehicles, all that kind of stuff. Not just push bikes, but on this electric off-road push bike, the motor where the disc brake mounts to was totally destroyed. It was a Crystal Lake motor. It was good for about 15,000 watts peak. And going from 50 mile an hour to nothing, or slowing right down, would destroy the V brakes. What I decided to do was run V brakes, because the rim had a braking surface on it, on the back, and disc brakes on the front, thinking it would be okay. It really wasn't. It would just eat. You know, going from 50 miles an hour down to sort of like 20 mile an hour to slow down would destroy those brake blocks really quickly, even with using that front brake as well. And the other thing is, of course, with cable-operated V brakes, I find the cables get a lot of mud and dirt and crud in them, and then your brake performance is even worse, because you can get the brakes sticking on, you can get it, you know, being harder to pull the lever, levers feeling inconsistent, and all the usual stuff. I'm sure most people have experienced this. You would definitely have in the UK. Yes, gear cables can get clogged up with stuff as well, but again, you have to replace those anyway at the moment. That's just, you don't really want the added pain of replacing both brake cables and a gear cable at the same time, or two gear cables if you're running a front derailleur. So V brakes versus discs. Yes, discs. The only problem with discs is you do have to bleed them, and this requires a bleed kit to do it properly. Basically a syringe with a fitting attached to the end of it, and some brakes are different. Shimano are different, Hayes are different, Avid's got their own, you know, all that kind of stuff. I can't remember which one is the same. I just have a multiple sort of like bleed kit, and you've got different adapters for different brakes in this bleed kit. But it is more tools you have to buy, whereas with V brakes you just have to simply replace the cable and the brake blocks. All you really need is a 5mm Allen key. So for general riding and commuting, there is definitely the argument to be made that V brakes can be easier, but The fact that it wears the rim away over time as well, to me, is a bit of a no. I did 10,000 miles when I was working. I was working about 20 miles away, so I was commuting 20 miles there, 20 miles back each day. I've done about 15,000 miles on one set of I think they were Tektro disc brakes on a B-twin 560, and the bike as well as the brakes were totally faultless, apart from just needing pads now and then. I didn't even need to bleed them, and I did change the fluid. Probably left it a bit too long, but it didn't really care. It was black and nasty, but it was still functioning perfectly fine the whole time. That's literally the only thing I really touched was gear cables, because they got clogged up with stuff on sort of a monthly basis, to be totally honest. That was riding off-road, to partly off-road, partly on-road to work. But yeah, that's just, with V-brakes you have to replace those cables as well, and it relies on the rims being true, so if you knock the rims out of true on a V-brake, the performance would degrade massively. Like, you knock a rim slightly out of true, you're going to really notice it on V-brakes. The consistency just isn't going to be there. Whereas with disc brakes, you can bend that rim up quite a lot, and you get a bit of death wobble and vibration, but the rim can be badly bent, and you can still carry on going, and it doesn't really matter. That's just the way it is. And yes, you can true rims, and people say, "Oh, it's easy to do." Sometimes it is. Sometimes you need a new rim because the actual rim itself has been flat spotted or otherwise damaged, and the braking with the V-brake, it's never going to make proper contact on that area of the rim ever again. So you've just got to replace it. A trail like Rim Dinger on Bike Park Wales would really be Vicious Valley, they call it, and it's nicknamed the Rim Dinger because it's known for basically snake biting the tyres. If you've got tubes, you'll potentially snake bite and put a hole in the tube, but at the same time it will crush your rim on rocks and stuff like that. That's another disadvantage. Then of course if you've got a flat spot and you've got V-brakes, the brake then has to actuate against the rim, and if the rim's got a dent in it or whatever else, it's just no good at all. You have to replace it. Whereas disc brakes, you can carry it on for a little bit longer till you need to replace that rim, so it works out easier and cheaper overall. But yeah, my personal preference is definitely disc brakes, as well as the whole sort of industry of automotive and modern push bikes in general. Disc brakes are, the way forward. That's just my opinion. Well, not really my opinion, it's the whole industry's opinion. If V-brakes were better, I'm fairly sure more people would be using them for competitive downhill cross-country or even enduro races. It's not really a matter of time or setup, it's literally just simply, they have a pit crew, so if there's setting up was an issue, they would just do the work, and that's not the issue. It is literally the issue that V-brakes suck compared to disc brakes when it comes to long descents and things like that. If you're doing trials bike riding, on the other hand, which is literally hopping onto objects, high amounts of stopping power, which V-brakes can provide in certain situations for a very short amount of time, then V-brakes will be fine for that, because you're not going to, there's no need for long continuous braking, and you're not going to get heat into the pads. They're not the trials. You're going to be mostly doing most of that is like street furniture, that kind of stuff. You're not getting lots of mud and dirt and water and salt and silt all over your rims or your brakes. Whereas with mountain biking, the rim is basically covered in a continuous layer of mud if you have V-brakes. That's generally the way it always seems to be. And then it will collect a load of mud around your rim brakes as well, which is an absolute pain in the butt. I remember quite a few times. I still ride retro mountain bikes, and I guarantee I'll still be riding, and there'll just be mud building up around the V-brakes on the old Cannondale, and that's just the way it is. That's retro bikes for you. But as far as advancements in mountain bike technology, I'll say disc brakes is one of the biggest. Right, that concludes my personal preference on V-brakes. Maybe you've got something to add. Maybe you still race downhill on V-brakes. I don't know. Let me know if you do. That concludes this video. Thank you for watching.